between 1946 and 1965. 1946 and 1965. You just stand real quick. All right, very quickly. All right, good. All right, we've got a fair number. Let's give them a hand. Good, good. All right. Wonderful, wonderful. Now, I know there are people here who are older than that, but I'm going somewhere with this. We're going to do a little juxtaposition here. Now, those who were born in the 60s or 70s, all right, I would be in that group. If you were born in the 60s or 70s, would you stand up? Sociologists call you more or less Gen Xers, Generation X. All right, good, all right, wonderful, wonderful. And then there is the current, well, I guess the current would be the Generation Z, but they're kind of, they're still young. But the rest of you, 1980 to 2000, if you were born in the years somewhere between 1980 and 2000, that's going to be most of you, of course. All right. So the rest of us, let's give them a hand. All right, good. Make you feel good. Don't want to make you feel left out. All right. So just like that, as I planned, the millennials or Gen Yers, Generation Y, as I guess that just follows Generation X, and so Generation Z. Somebody asked me recently. So what's the next generation going to be called? And right now it's just the generation nothing. What comes after Z? It's just I guess Christ comes back then. I'm not sure, but nonetheless, here we are. And sociologists love to have these neat categories and to kind of put us all in there. Now, the truth is, I was born in 1979, and so I'm really, am I Gen X? Am I millennial? I don't know. I'm just kind of a mixture, I guess. And really, that's where you are now as well. Many of you may actually be, even though you were born before 2000, are kind of maybe the young end of the millennials. The millennials are the ones who mostly have graduated from college, maybe even grad school. They're out in the business world, but you're following them. And I think for right now, sociologists are still considering you millennials. Well, who are the millennials? Who are the baby boomers? Who are the Gen Xers? Let me just share just a few interesting points. The contrast. Baby boomers have 85 pictures of their family on the wall and 100 VHS cassettes on the shelf. Millennials have 85 pictures and 100 movie clips of themselves on their iPhone. Baby boomers value privacy. Very important to baby boomers. It's slightly less important to Gen X. Millennials don't even know what privacy means. Baby boomers see life as a pyramid. Someone has to rise to the top. You have to have somebody at the top. And there's a struggle to get there, but somebody eventually gets to the top. Someone has to rise to the top. Millennials see life as flat. Anyone who tries to get to the top gets toppled over, right? There's no there. Think about the millennial type movements. The Tea Party, Occupy Wall Street, movements in the Middle East, movements all across, political movements, social movements. Who leads this stuff? You can't name a leader for the Tea Party or Occupy Wall Street or whatever else other movements go on, because the idea is, or the mentality is, we're just kind of all in this together. There are pros and cons to all of that. Baby boomers ate breakfast at 6 o'clock, lunch at noon, and supper at 5. Gen Xers ate breakfast at 7, lunch at noon, supper at 5 or 6. Millennials eat breakfast at 11, lunch at 3, and supper at 9, and then fourth meal at midnight. Right? If that's you, you know where you are. Baby boomers retire from a company after 30 years, perhaps. Millennials are more likely to have 30 different jobs in 30 years, including multiple self-starting businesses. Consequently, millennials feel less loyalty to a job because they're always looking for the next one. And that could be good, it might be bad. Less loyalty, maybe not as much job security, maybe your income is kind of fluctuating, but on the optimistic side, you're always looking for something better. Millennials often experience what one television series aptly named Arrested Development describes. I have no idea what the content of that, but the name is interesting. Arrested Development. Forever postponing adulthood. Living with the parents sex until they're 30 plus or whatever it is. But those are trends that we have seen, that we have experienced, and as part of, maybe you're not there, but some of those you understand. You're there. You know what it means to eat supper at midnight. Go through Taco Bell because they're open late. Now everybody's open late, right? I saw a billboard yesterday on the way out to my in-laws. McDonald's said something about, think of the logic of this, but it said something about, what are lights for except to be open at, the middle of the night, right? So we got to keep the lights on. That means keep the lights on just because we can. But that's the mentality of where we are now in our society, that things are quite different. Now, here is what happens, though. If we can think of, a kind of timeline of generations, we have the silent generation of world wars, and then we have the baby boomers and Gen Xers and millennials, and then the next, and so on. Obviously, we have a large spectrum of age and experience. But what often happens, and it's not peculiar to any single generation, even though we all like to think it is that one generation has a difficult time as the next generation comes of age of trusting them. So let's look at, first of all, from the older generation. This is, by the way, this is all introduction to where I'm going. But I'll try and get through this. The older generation looks with a little bit of suspicion on the younger generation that's coming on, that's going to be replacing them at some point, with some mistrust. But the generation before them did the same thing. And the thing is, it's not new. That's happened as long as life has been. That's no doubt has happened. But we still have to deal with that. That is still a fact. That is part of the reality of being a part of this world and living this life, and especially in a society like ours where it's so fluid, where traditions change so quickly, and each generation has the peculiarities, where in many places in the world where the culture is a little more stagnant, you don't have to change. It shifts so quickly. But we experience quick change. And with that comes a mistrust. Also with that, and this leads me to the passage we're going to look at, comes sometimes a criticism, maybe even nitpicking, people pointing out all of the flaws that your generation has. Now, I'm not going to do that this morning. Are there flaws? Absolutely, there are flaws. We can stand back, all of us older people, and people older than me can look at us, Gen Xers, and they can say, man, let's just give you the list of the flaws that they have, and they're probably exactly right. And then we can all then turn our attention on the rest of you and say, here are some of the flaws. And one of them might be the lack of leadership. Everything's just kind of flat. The world's flat. No privacy. Everything goes on Facebook. Everything goes, and then also, we like to take pictures of ourselves and post them, and it's amazing. Now, the truth is, the reason baby boomers don't have, maybe they do now, I don't know, but the reason they didn't have, 75 pictures of themselves and 100 clips, of themselves on their iPhones, they just didn't have it. If they did, they probably would too. But it was easy to look at the next generation and to criticize, to point out its weaknesses, to point out its disabilities. But here's what I want to tell you today. This is the message I want you to take. It's this. That first of all, as a generation, but then also as individuals, your weaknesses, your inabilities, the criticisms that others may direct towards you, make sure you understand this when you leave here. They are not a hindrance to God using you. Your inabilities are not a hindrance to God using you as a generation and as individuals. And I want you to be convinced of that today. When you leave here, you may already think that, but I want you to make sure that you understand, at least this coming from another person that you're not used to hearing speak, that your hindrances are simply not, or your inabilities are simply not a hindrance to God's ability to use you. In fact, He made you to be exactly who you are, even as individuals, with your inabilities and your flaws and your weaknesses because he wants to manifest his power in your inabilities. And so John chapter 9 is where we're going to look at this morning. It's the passage we're going to be taking a look at here this morning and seeing that this is exactly what Jesus said when he and his disciples came across this blind man, and Jesus gave an explanation for why this man had this disability, this blindness, this particular disability. And I want us to understand from this passage that your inabilities are not a hindrance to God. Secondly, though, when we get to the end of this passage, we recognize that there's a second point, and that is this. But unbelief will fail you every time. Your disabilities are not a hindrance to God, but unbelief is. Now let's look at the passage. And as Jesus passed by, this is John chapter 9, as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. Now let me make some comments through here as we read this. Notice, first of all, that it was Jesus, not the disciples, even though the disciples asked the question. We'll look at that in just a moment, verse 2. But it was Jesus who saw the man. You understand, you've taken the Gospels, you've taken the class, perhaps you were raised in Sunday school, you've heard the stories, you have seen the plays, you've seen the dramas, you know Jesus, you know how he acted, you know he performed miracles. But think about it once again. Jesus busied himself, always keeping an eye out for the person that needed his touch. Now, is there anyone here this morning that needs God's touch? Absolutely. Every single one of us. We would say, yes, not just once, but twice and over and over and over. Every day, God, I need your touch. Jesus has his eye looking for you. He knows you by name. He knows how he created you. He put you together very carefully and very intently. He knows exactly who you are, and he has his eye on you. He knows exactly when and how you need touched by his hand. And so God, in this case, he is walking through, Jesus is walking through, he sees the blind man. It is Jesus who sees the blind man. Disciples seem to follow up. They're always kind of a step behind, trying to catch up. Jesus sees the blind man. He sees you. He knows all. God misses nothing. You understand that this morning? God misses nothing. Yesterday when I tried to share that message that God is here, but do you know him? Listen, and I still feel like there's probably one or two people here who are in that state where you do not know God. I believe 99.9%, most of you are, I just feel like you're right there with me. But I know that, and that's not just intuition. So that's by observation as well. I know some things about some of you that you don't know I know. But I do know this. There are some people in this congregation, I don't know you. I wouldn't be able to come to you. All right? I don't know you by name. I don't know you by face. But I know there are some things in your life that you have not acknowledged and that you're hiding. God does not miss that. God sees all. Jesus misses nothing. He saw when this blind man was there, he saw that he needed his touch. God sees you this morning, whatever touch it is that you need. Here we're talking this morning about your weaknesses, not so much about sin, but we're talking about you understand that you have inabilities. You're not natural, perhaps, at being able to get up and sing, or get up and preach, or get out and talk to people, or get out and knock on doors, and you're not you're an upfront person, or maybe an outspoken person, and you struggle when you try to testify, or you try to share your faith with somebody else. You struggle, you can't find the words. God knows your weaknesses. He doesn't miss a thing. God sees all. Then in verse 2, the disciples, they kind of caught up with him. They asked him, they said, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents? Of course, in their mind, their typical Jewish mind, blindness, in particular, blindness was often viewed as the result of your sin or your parent. It was a curse from God. God cursed this man because of his sin or his parents' sin or perhaps his grandparents' sin. And Jesus said, no, that's not the case at all. Verse 3, he says, neither this man nor his parents have sinned, but here is why this man was born with this particular disability. In order order that the works of God should be made manifest in him, in order that for this time to come, God knew when he created this man with this particular disability that this time would come, that Jesus would pass by at this moment, at this place, and that he would see this man sitting on the side of the road, and his disciples would ask this question, and God would be able to manifest his power in touching and meeting this man's need. But then he also knew that there was going to be more. There were going to be some people watching that were going to be a significant point to this whole story that Jesus was going to share. So I have no idea. I suppose that the only reason that Generation Y, or the millennials, as I've called them, I guess it's just because it follows Generation X. But there is a little irony in that that you all are called Generation Y. Why? And I think I foresee the difference between Generation X and Generation Y. My generation, there were a lot of why questions. And even the generation before me, there were a lot of why questions, but a lot of times it wasn't really a very sincere why. It was you better prove to me why I need to do this, or else I'm not. It kind of a rebellious why. What I perceive, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think I perceive correctly, in the Generation Y, or the millennials, it's a sincere why. It is we really want to know. After all, we live in a world where information is at your fingertips. And we ought to, you can Google anything. If you ask me a question, I say, I don't know. What are you going to do? You're going to get your phone out, you're going to Google it, you're going to put it on Facebook and see if anybody else knows. Now, you may not get the right answer, but you will get answers, that's for sure. You will get answers because answers are out there, whether they're the right ones or not. But here we have the disciples. They're asking why. And God says, Jesus replies to them, not for the reasons you think, not for the reasons you think, not for the reasons you've been told, or that your culture has told you, but for this other reason. Sometimes we experience that from one generation to another. Sometimes reasons for things change. One good reason gives way to another good reason. You see, every good reason that's good for one generation may not be good for another. That doesn't mean there's no reason, right? But the disciples are asking why. And Jesus says, not for the reason that you thought, or that you were formed to think by your culture, by your people, by Jewish ways of thinking. But let me give you some insight here. It's so that the power of God can be manifest. So he continues, and let's continue down through the passage here. He says, I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night comes when no man can come. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So he is saying that the reason for this man's disability is so God can manifest his work, particularly at this time. So just watch disciples. Look what God is going to do. And when he had thus spoken, he spit on the ground, made clay of spittle, and anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. He told the man, go wash the pool of Siloam, and he went, he washed, and he was healed. Verse 8, we have a transition here. Verse 8, the neighbors, therefore, evidently the man, perhaps he'd gone home, but somewhere in town, neighbors, they saw him. It says the neighbors, therefore, and they which before had seen him that was blind, said, is this he that sat and begged? And some said, this is he. Others said, no, it's just somebody who looks like him. But he came. He heard them whispering and talking. And he said, it's me. It really is me. I was blind. Therefore said he unto them, or they unto him, well, how were your eyes opened? And he answered and said, this man. He's indicating here that he really doesn't know much about Jesus. Perhaps he heard about Jesus, but he doesn't know much about him, because we see a slight progression here. But at this point, he's to his neighbors, he's saying, this man, they call him Jesus, made clay, anointed my eyes, and told me to go to the pool of Siloam and wash, and I went and I received sight. So they asked him, well, where is he? Well, he didn't really think about following Jesus. He was just rejoicing that he could see now. And he said, well, I don't know. Then we have another transition. We change. And now, it says they, perhaps the neighbors went. They were a little suspicious. They went. They said, well, we need to get the lawyers here to look into this. We need to get the Pharisees. We need to get the smart people here to check this out, make sure that this is all kosher and everything. And so they come and they get the Pharisees, and they bring him to the one that was blind. It happened to be, John tells us here, that it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and he opened this blind man's eyes. So, then again, the Pharisees, they also asked him the same question that the neighbors had asked him. How he had received the sight, he said to them, he put the clay in my eyes, I washed, and now I can see. Therefore said some of the Pharisees in verse 16, this man is not of God. So they're coming in already, you see. They're coming in probably having experience, or at least some of these have probably heard of Jesus. And some of them have probably seen Jesus, but they know him at least by reputation. Probably haven't seen him. But they're already coming to the situation, already saying that whoever this man is, whoever this Jesus is, he's not God. In fact, he's a sinner. So look at what they say. This man is not God because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, how can man as a sinner do such miracles then? Well, that's a logical question. And so there was division among them. They said to the blind man again, just to make sure, what do you say of him to open your eyes? Now listen, remember to the neighbors, he said, well, he's a man. He didn't really seem to have put much thought into who Jesus was. But now he's put a little bit of thought. He said, well, he's heard this debate going on. He sees this faction between these two parties kind of going back and forth. He can't be God. He's a sinner. These people say he can't be a sinner because he performed a miracle, and so he's kind of torn. But then he comes to his own sense and says, well, he must at least be a prophet. So he replies, and he tells them, well, he is a prophet indeed. But the Jews did not believe concerning him that had been blind and received his sight. So they called his parents. They called his parents up, and they asked him, is this your son? Who you say was born blind? And now explain to us, how can he see now? His parents answered and said, in verse 20, he says, we know that this is our son. We vouch for that. We can verify this. And that he was indeed born blind. But how he sees now, we don't know. And who hath opened his eyes, we know not. He is of age, ask him. They're perhaps, deflecting, perhaps. Maybe they're a little scared, I don't know. But nonetheless, let him speak for himself. And let me stop there for just a moment and say this. Sometimes generations, we need to allow each other to speak for themselves. Amen? Can I hear an amen? We need to allow a generation to represent themselves. And I touched on this a little bit this morning with the men. The ladies are here, so I'll come over to this side and I'll tell you. That is, very, very soon, you all, and maybe some of you already are in churches, and you may be going through difficult situations, you may be going to situations that are just peachy, but sooner or later, you're going to come across some circumstance as a pastor, pastor's wife, board member, or so on, where generation differences is going to make a real difference in ministry. That's just a fact. That's just experience. But let me strongly encourage you to consider this, that we need each other. We desperately need each other. I serve on a committee right now in our church that, and I had a little bit of input on who's on the committee, but I strongly encourage the formation of the committee. We need multi-generations here. We need somebody to represent the older generation. We need somebody to represent the next one, the next one, the next one. And so we do, and it's beautiful. But there has to be, when it comes to ministry, there has to be a mutual respect. You have to figure out a way to say, you know what, I think things need to be different. I think we need to change this about our worship, or I think we need to sing more contemporary choruses. And maybe probably everybody knows we don't use hymn books here much. I love hymn books. But just little differences, little things here. I noticed one of the things that is now very, very common, at least in my church, maybe in yours as well, but the use of soundtracks is just kind of run-of-the-mill now. That's just, my generation, we stick the track in there and sing along with it. I remember when I was a senior in high school, and I asked our pastor, or I didn't, but somebody in our class asked our pastor, hey, can we have a soundtrack? Absolutely not. That was That was not acceptable at that time. Now, maybe that's just peculiarity of my church. I have no idea. But nonetheless, that was a little slight change that some people say, it's just a generation. Now, I understand it works both ways. But it's important to understand here that we need, and you specifically, you millennials, you need the generations that come before you. Yes, you are the next leaders. Yes, you are the ones who are going to be making a lot of critical decisions. We have a lot of critical decisions have been passed down to us that are being left undecided by previous generations. Partially because maybe there was just a lot of conflict and they just couldn't come to a consensus on something. Or maybe because it's just a new issue that they haven't had to deal with. Technology stuff that you do have to deal with, that we do have to deal with. But we have to respect, and we have to make sure they recognize that there are, in many of our churches, I can guarantee you, any church you go to, there's an older man and an older woman, an older couple who are sitting there feeling like they are useless. And it might be just simply because the younger people have not acknowledged them or give them attention or have told them straight out, we need you. We need your prayers. We need your wisdom. We need your insight. We need your experience. We need your relationships that you've built all of these years. We need you. And so, I want to strongly encourage you, young people. Yes, there's change coming down the road. Yes, there's change. We are living in that kind of a world. Things do shift here and there. But let's not leave anyone behind. God has placed them here at this time in 2013 for a purpose. And that purpose includes you and includes me to help shepherd us. And older people, we do need you. Don't be afraid to come and to put your hand on us and say, as a father, or as a mother, or as a grandfather, as a grandmother, come and say, hey, can we share? Can we have coffee together? Can we talk about just life and feel one another and get a sense of working together? So, where were we? All right, so the parents said, don't ask us, ask him. He's of age. Let him speak for himself. Verse 22. So these words spake his parents because they feared the Jews, and the Jews had agreed already that if any man did confess that he was Christ, that he should be put out of the synagogue. So there are consequences. Therefore, for this reason, his parents said, he's of age, ask him. So again, they called the man a second time that was blind, and said to him, give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner. So if you are really a servant of God, if you're really a child of God, then you will give this answer. But the blind man answered, I love this answer. The blind man answered and said, whether he be a sinner or no, I know not. But one thing I know, whereas I was blind, but now I see. I love that passage. What's he appealing to? Is he saying, now listen, guys, let me give you these reasons here. Now let's just analyze this. Now he had analyzed it well, all right? He'd had a time to think about it, but when it came down to it, what did he do? He said, listen, all I know is that I experienced the world in this way at one moment, and the next moment I experienced it differently. My experience right now in life is different. It has changed because this man, I don't know who he is. He's a man, he's a prophet. I don't know who he is. A sinner, maybe, maybe not. I don't know, and quite frankly, he doesn't seem to care. All he knows is this, that this man came, and he was the only one that he had ever encountered that could touch him and heal and manifest the power of God in this man's life because of his disability. And so he said, listen, guys, you can call him all you want to, but you're not going to convince me otherwise. Whatever he was, all I know is this, that I was blind, but I've been touched, and I'm different now. And then said they to him again, what did he to thee? How opened he your eyes? And he answered them, I've told you already. And then he begins to kind of preach a sermon to them. You didn't hear, did you? You weren't listening. Maybe they need somebody to touch their ears. Wherefore, you would hear again. You need me to tell you again. And you would be his disciples, maybe. He's using perhaps a little bit of sarcasm. So they reviled him. They said, you're his disciple. You're in secret. You're a plant. He planted you there. It's not real. This is all make-believe. You're really one of his disciples. And he says, or they continue We know that God spoke to Moses. As for this fellow, we don't know where he's from. Now, they were pretty certain before, he's a sinner. He's not from God. Now we're not real sure. But the man answered and said to them, why herein is a marvelous thing? What's so incredible about this? Why is it so hard to believe? Why is it so hard to believe that a blind man who is sitting here, seemingly his whole life, blind, can now be changed? Don't you believe in miracle-working God? Well, he got to the point. The point was that they refused to believe that Jesus could be God, that Jesus could do the things that only God can do. They refused to recognize Jesus. They refused to recognize the power of God. By the way, your inabilities are not a hindrance to God. Unbelief is. We know that God, they say, we know that God does not hear sinners, but if any man be a worshiper of God and does his will, that's the person that God hears. Since the world began, it was not heard that any man opened the eyes of one that was born blind. If this man were not of God, he could do nothing. And they answered him and said, well, you were altogether born in sins, and how do you teach us? And they cast him out. They had enough of it. Then we have another change, another transition here where Jesus now has returned to the picture. Jesus heard that they had cast this man who had been blind out. And when he found them, he said to him, do you believe in the Son of God? He answered and said, who is he, Lord, that I might believe on him? And Jesus said to him, you have both seen him, and in fact, it's he that is talking to you. And he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped. You see the transition, or the progression in this man's faith? At first, to his neighbors, who is this man? I don't know, he's just a man. He's just a man who came by. They called him Jesus. Then to the Pharisees, who do you say he is? Well, he must at least be a prophet. He must at least be a man of God. Now he is acknowledging him as Lord. And he is acknowledging him through worship. Lordship. As a generation, your hindrances, your inabilities, your weaknesses will not hinder God from using you. But if you do not allow him to be Lord, through your unbelief, it will fail you every time. A simple illustration is particularly my one son, Corin, who is almost 4. But before he learned how to open candy, he loved Sunday school. Sunday school means crafts and candy and all that good stuff. And they come home from church, and if he has a pocket, his pockets come home stuffed with candy. All right? And he comes, and when he was about 2 years old, he couldn't get like that Laffy Taffy or whatever it was. He couldn't get those packages open, so what would he do? He'd just stick it in his mouth. Package and all. He'd chew on it, he'd get all nasty, and finally he would give up and throw it away, or just kind of toss it. And I'd have to go and stick in the trash. Now listen, you need to bring this to me. And this is not something you can do. And so finally he learned, maybe when he was 3, he learned that if he brings his candy to me, with some limitation, if he will bring his candy to me, that I will open the package so he doesn't have to chew through the plastic to get to the good stuff, right? And so he does that now. He knows. And he knows that Daddy will give him candy. However, there is a caveat. There is a condition, all right? So when your parents remember this, my kids who do not get any candy, it doesn't matter if it came from Sunday school or not, unless they recite a scripture. Simple rule. All right, Corin, what's your scripture? It can be any scripture. It's the one that we're memorizing the most recently. So right now, he who walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. Our older kids already know that one, but he was like 1 and 2 when they memorized it. So he has to learn it now. And so the cool thing is this, that now my students, my high school students, they know this. And so anytime that I bring my son or my wife is there teaching lessons or something, my son will go into the kindergarten room perhaps, and break time he's out with the kids. Anyone he sees who he thinks might be susceptible and gullible, he'll go up there and smile at him and ask for a quarter or ask for candy. And so, but they know they caught on, so now when they ask, they very proudly, they'll hold their little sucker and say, now say your scripture. And so he'll say their scripture and he gets their candy. Listen, but here's the thing. Here's the point of all that, and that's this, that he has to relinquish, at least at that point, he had to relinquish master control to get to the good stuff. I had to open it for him. Here's the point. Here's the application. It's this simple point. It comes from Henry Blackaby, his classic book, Experiencing God, where he has just a section where he talks about this. It's wonderful stuff. But he makes this simple point. He says this, that if you are only doing the things that you know you can do, then you need to find God in your life. Because when God puts his hand on somebody, he gives you tasks that only he can do. God has something for you as a generation, for you as individuals, despite your inabilities. Those are not a hindrance to God. But he has something, but let me give this news to you. It's not just because it's fitting to you, it's God-sized. It's not something that necessarily fits your strengths. Now, thankfully, God, when he calls you to do something, he understands. He put you together. He knit you together with certain strengths and abilities, and he will probably call you to use those strengths. But often, and we see that in this passage, often he gave you a specific inability because he knew that down the road he's going to be calling you and putting his hand on your life and calling you to something that you specifically feel incapable of doing because he wants to demonstrate his power in your life. So don't buy into the idea that God will only call you to do things that you know you can do. Because that's not the way it works. If you'd asked me when I was a young teenager that I would ever get up in any pulpit, much less God's Bible School camp meeting, and preach a sermon, I would say, absolutely no way. God hasn't given me the ability to do that. I didn't understand. Abraham also didn't understand that exactly when he left Ur that he was going to have to sacrifice, or at least go through the act of sacrificing his son. Right? God took him each step of the way, and when he was ready, God asked him to do that. And God leads us that way. But he gives us God-sized tasks. And let me tell you, there are some big tasks that your generation has, that our generation really has. And again, I'm kind of on the in between here, the Gen Xers and the millennials. I'm right 1970. That kind of puts me in the mix. But God has given us some tasks that you and I do not have the ability to accomplish. But that's exactly the way he wants it. Because he wants to demonstrate his power. He is giving us a task that doesn't fit us, that fits him. And he wants to prove himself through it. So now we have the blind man confessing that Jesus is Lord. And moving all the way from the recognition that his inabilities were not a limitation to God, now to understanding that it's all about his belief in God. But John here is making another point, and Jesus is making another point in this passage. So let's finish it out there. And then we're going to, if we have the mics ready, just like 2 or 3 minutes here. Jesus says in verse 37, Jesus said to him, let's go down to verse 39. Jesus said, "For judgment I have come into this world, that they which see not might see." So those who are weak, those who have inabilities, those who recognize those I may come, that they which see might be made blind. So now we're getting to another point. And some of the Pharisees which were with him heard these words and said to him, "Are we blind also?" Jesus said to them, "If you are blind, you should have no sin. But now you say, we see. Therefore your sin remains." So he's making this closing point in contrast to this blind man, physically blind man who was healed, to these spiritually blind people who through their unbelief were not. Making this point that your inabilities, your physical inabilities, your mental, your emotional, whatever your weaknesses are as a person, those are not a hindrance to God using you. But unbelief will fail you. Unbelief will fail you. It will make you blind. Your inabilities as a generation, as individuals, are not a hindrance to God. You say, "Yes, but you don't know. I struggle all through school. I've always struggled. I'm not getting good grades in my classes. I'm just getting by, and maybe not even getting by. And I have a hard time with college life. I'm not sure I can make it. I have a hard time with people. I'm just not a people person. You understand? Listen, some of those things I don't understand, but I have an ability. Every single one of us have inabilities. We all have things in our life that we can say, oh, Lord, I hope, please don't ever call me to do that. Please, Lord, don't ever call me to do that. We know, all right? We know those things, every single one of us. But let me tell you something. God is not limited by our weaknesses, by our inabilities. He wants to use those. He wants to call us into places that are not very comfortable, just like he did Jeremiah, that I referred to yesterday, in order to manifest his power and his glory and the fact that it's all about him and his power in this world, in this kingdom's work. So here's how we're going to close.
We're glad you joined us. God's Bible School and College prepares students for lives of ministry wherever God calls them. This content is possible because of the generous support of friends like you. To support GBSC, visit giving.gbs.edu. Thank you.